All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Paul McFlynn, and very pleased to welcome you to the second day of the NERI Labour Market Conference. We're looking at a very interesting second day today. We have 4 sessions running both this morning and this afternoon. If you have registered for the Labour Market Conference, you will have received a conference program, but if not, it is available on our website, neorinstitute.net, under the events tab. So each of the 4 sessions today is a separate Zoom link, so you have to click into each one of those. But if you have registered, you will have received those Zoom links. But we will also be tweeting out each of the links to each session just before they start from our Twitter account. And obviously, if you have any friends or colleagues who haven't registered and want to join into to watch a session, please let them know that that's where they can get it. Also, at the end of each session, the link to the next one will be posted in the wee chat function on the side that will pop up. In terms of speakers, each speaker is getting 15 minutes for their presentation and questions and answers. So it's tight, but hopefully with a 10 to 12 minute presentation, there is good opportunity for questions. And just to emphasize that again, there is a chat function, but there's a Q&A function, and the Q&A function is where you write in your questions, and you can send them in at any point during the speaker's presentation, and the chair will gather them all up at the end and put them to the speaker. Other than that, my colleague Paul Golder-Kelly is always in the background of these things, and he's there at the moment, actually, not in the background, and he will pop up from time to time just if we're having any technical issues or to give any sort of further announcements throughout the day. But hopefully keeping to time, we are going to have this morning's plenary session, which is very graciously delivered to us by the Central Statistics Office, and Sean O'Connor is here today to present on the PAYE Modernisation, the PMod data, which has caused much excitement within our community of researchers, and I know we're all very much looking forward to his presentation today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sean.
Thanks very much, Paul. And my name is Sean O'Connor. I'm statistician in the Central Statistics Office, and I work in our administrative data centre. So my primary responsibilities are processing administrative data that we receive from the Revenue Commissioners and the CRO. And I also maintain the CSO's personal income register, which is another, I suppose, which is derived from administrative data. So my presentation is on PAYE Modernisation, or PMod as I refer to it, and some of the opportunities and challenges that we've experienced in the CSO. So I suppose just to give you a bit of now we're going again on the ADC, or the Administrative Data Centre. So I suppose as the Central Statistics Office, we receive various pieces of data from government bodies like the likes of the ESP, Revenue Commissioners. And basically what we do is we sit in between, I suppose, the statistical areas in the CSO and the various government bodies, and we act as a warehouse for administrative data that CSO receives under the Statistics Act. So we process it, standardise it, and make it available to the wider office for statistical uses. So PMod, or PAYE, so it's probably been up and running for well over a year now, so since January 2019. And I suppose in terms of tax, it's a big sea change. So moving from employers reporting maybe once or twice a year on how much they pay their employees to moving to, I suppose, every time that they actually do pay them. And I suppose the logic behind this was it was to make things easier to deduct and pay at the right time. So things like income tax, PRSI, USC, and local property tax. So I suppose we always received employee level information, so what we call the old style P35. So the CSO will receive 2 files each year. So a provisional file in April and a final file in August. So Taking 2018 data as an example, so in April 2019, we would have received the last provisional file of the old style P35, and in August of that same year, we would have got the final version. In terms of the contents of the file, so it would have been one record based on unique combination of employee and employer ID, and you would have had, I suppose, that records, gross pay for the year, PRSI information, taxable information. In terms of, I suppose, the size of the file and its structure would have been around 3.7 million records, 3.5 million records, and over 30 variables. And in terms of an administrative data source and its use in statistical production, it would have been used right across the office for various different outputs. So things like GDP, structured business statistics would have been used as an input in Silk. And then I suppose probably one of the primary uses are earnings and labour market division, which would use it for various different outputs. So in terms of PMod, so it's a much, as you'd expect, a larger volume of data being sent. So we get a file, so moving from previously 2 files each month to, each year to a file each month. So just taking, I suppose, what we get this month. So the last Monday of each month, we get all records sent into the PMod system for the previous month. In terms of, say, volume, it's an increase of what I said previously, 3.5 million records to around 5.5 or 7 million records each month, and a lot more variables, so around 70 variables, and they range from, as I said, pay, tax, pension contributions, so on and so forth. So I suppose we get the data in the AD, and we need to make it, I suppose, usable for people in the office, for statistics. So within the data set, there's a variable called pay date, and I suppose, as you might expect, it relates to the date the individual is being paid, whether it's money into the bank, a check, so on and so forth. So we take this data and we split it into monthly data sets. So you'll have your January 2019 data set, your February, your June, and so on and so forth. And basically what these data sets contain is one record for each valid pay slip in the month. So you're moving from, I suppose, previously a yearly summary to, for all intents and purposes, a payslip level data set. And within that, you have, as I said, the gross pay of that record, the pay for income tax, the various bits of PSI classes, pension payments, LPT payments, and so on and so forth. And I suppose we also created a bit of added value for people that might only be interested in a yearly summary or a running year-to-date summary. So as we get new pieces of information in, we incrementally update the master data set as we move through the year, and we aggregate that on a unique combination of employee ID, employer ID, and PRSI class. So one record for each unique combination of those 3 variables. And I suppose for researchers and maybe for the wider public, it's I suppose be cognizant of this administrative data. So I suppose employers are able to make amendments and deletions to payslips that they previously submitted. So any delivery that we get in a month may have amendments to be made or deletions to be made for our previous month. And generally, I suppose, from the kind of analysis we've undertaken internally, it's generally only for the previous month or 2. But again, I suppose to be cognizant that I suppose PMod in itself is fluid in nature. And I suppose, yeah, as users, you should be probably aware of that. And I suppose this kind of graph gives you an idea of the number of records that come in each month. So you can see a kind of peaks and troughs depending on, I suppose, what month you're in. So there's a certain element of seasonality in it. So I suppose you see kind of interesting changes. So kind of in the summer months, if you look at things like by NACE code, you'll see a drop off in NACE sectors related to the education sector, which I presume relates to people that are on contracts in secondary schools or maybe primary schools or in universities. Those kind of NACE sectors drop off in the summer, and then they come back in August, which I presume when the school year starts up again. And then I suppose you see, the onset of COVID, the number of active records starts to fall again, and it started to pick up again in July to what we've seen in previous months in 2019. Again, something interesting from the data itself, it's the pay frequency. So pay frequency is a variable within it. And this is just an idea of what kind of sectors get paid and what kind of basis. So we see the most predominant pay frequencies tend to be weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, and you see weekly tends to dominate, a lot of areas. So things like accommodation and food, real estate activities, manufacturing, I suppose all those ones left. Fortnightly seems to be more common in sectors such as education and public administration, which I'm a part of. We tend to get paid on a fortnightly basis. And then you see sectors such as information communication and financial insurance activities are more likely to be paid on a monthly basis. And that's also true slightly of the professional, scientific and technical services sectors. So I suppose kind of looking ahead, kind of the current benefits that this data is being utilised within the office, and some maybe potential new avenues which could be explored. So I suppose on the current side of what's currently being done, so PMod is a real-time data source. It's a great benefit to our colleagues up in Dublin who compiled various quarterly macroeconomic indicators, so quarterly estimates of GDP. So on our labour market side, and I'll talk about this a bit, so it provides insights into the employment of earnings, and that's became particularly important during COVID-19. I suppose it can be used to examine cohorts of interest and help inform public policy and society in general. I said that those next few slides kind of give you an illustration of what has been done and potentially what could be done into the future. And so I suppose this data comes from our labour market insight bulletin. So our colleagues use PMod data to compare the changes in employment and earnings in Q1 and Q2 of 2020. Some of you may have seen this already, but I suppose it's no surprise we see employment has fallen, I suppose, right across the economy. So across all sectors, there was a decrease over 2 quarters around 13.5%, and it's probably well known already. It was most severe in accommodation and food services, where it fell at over 60%. The arts sector where it was around nearly 40%, and then it's probably some of the areas that were less adversely affected, where the likes of industry, where there was only a drop of 3%, or human health and social work, where the fall was only around 4%. And I suppose those yellow dots, or gold dots, I should say, look at the change in earnings over those 2 quarters. So we see kind of a mixed trend. So it's kind of interesting to see that fall in accommodation and food services, where employment fell by around 60%, but earnings actually grew by around 11%, and that could potentially be attributed to the kind of people that stayed in employment and the type of people that lost out in employment. So I suppose from some of the conferences and some of the analysis I've seen so far, it seemed to be younger and less well-paid people that kind of fell out of employment. Sorry, I was just looking at the Q&A. So on to the next slide. 1 second there. Yeah, sorry. So again, this comes from the same statistical bulletin that was released. And this looks at the idea of PMod and also the temporary wage subsidy scheme, and how those two, I suppose, data sources interacted. So I suppose the green bars look at the share of employment, or at least one TWS payment or TWSS payment in Q2. And the gold bar signifies the the TWS payments as a share of total earnings. So just picking out again, accommodation and food services, which is, is probably one of the most interesting, well, to me anyway. So around 60% of employments in that sector had at least one TWS payment in Q2. But I suppose what's interesting is, over half of the earnings of individuals in that sector was made up by that TWSS payment. I suppose, on the other side, then you see like the public admin and defence, where it's negligible. It's it's not even 1%. It's not even 0.5%. But again, I suppose that gives you an idea of the benefits of maybe combining different administrative data sources and the insights it can give to, I suppose, policy, the general public. And speaking of that, I suppose, well, this is nothing to do with PMod. It's some other work I'm looking at. So this is a project I've undertaken, and we're hoping to put it out in the next few months. So this looks at the characteristics of property buyers, So just to kind of talk you through what's up on the screen. So the bar chart signifies the house price bands purchased by joint purchasers. The gold bar or the gold line chart signifies the median income of that particular cohort, and the table on the right signifies the median age of the purchaser within that particular band. So just to take one as an example, so you would see, I suppose, the most common price band purchase within is the 250 to 300,000 mark, and I suppose the median income of that particular cohort is around €74,000. And in terms of the median age of that cohort, it's around 36 or 36 years of age. And I suppose then you see at the top and the tail, so the cheapest band and the highest band, it tends to be older purchasers that buy that type of, or that price band of property. I suppose another thing I'm always interested in, and I come from an economics background, so I would have worked as a research assistant prior to joining the CSO. I was always interested in, I suppose, a geographical breakdown of particular statistics. So whether it be house prices, income, industry structure, and so on and so forth. So what this looks at is price to income ratios of house buyers. So on the left, it signifies the price to income ratio of a sole purchaser, and on the right, it's the house price income ratio of a joint purchaser. So I suppose darker shades indicate a higher ratio, which some people might infer to be greater affordability issues. So I suppose it's much more pronounced on the left for sole purchasers, and now maybe that's to do with, they might have a property, that they're using as leverage to purchase a new one. Whereas on the right, I suppose we see that, the ratio is much higher in the kind of urban areas. So, Dublin and maybe the greater Dublin area, and then Cork and its surrounding land. So I suppose we're hoping to put this type of analysis out soon. But I suppose this gives you an idea of, the benefits of what administrative data can do. It can provide real insights into areas that I suppose policymakers are particularly interested in, none so being than, housing, which is still a hot topic. So just to finish up, so in terms of PMod, I suppose we can see it can act as a complement to various different outputs produced already. So the likes of Labour Force Survey, EHEX, and various other metrics. I suppose one of the key benefits of administrative data is it can provide detailed geography and sectoral information. So I suppose sometimes when you work with a survey, some people are interested in counties or lower geographical levels, or some people are interested in 3-digit NACE or 4-digit NACE. Some surveys aren't designed for that. If standard errors of estimates get larger, their confidence intervals get wider. With administrative data, I suppose you're able to go down to finer levels of detail, for particular cohorts of interest. We can combine administrative data with other sources, as seen previously, to help inform policy and public discourse. So things like housing affordability. We can look at things like job churn, like who's leaving the labour market, who's entering the labour market. Are you greater probability to leave the labour market if you have a lower level of educational attainment? Are firms more likely to let people go if they're less productive, more productive? They have a higher or lower export intensity. We can I suppose try and answer some of those questions with using various different pieces of administrative data. And I said, and just as a kind of a final note, while administrative data provides great insights, you still need surveys to fill in various pieces of information. So particularly, I suppose, qualitative information. So when you think of things like silk and things like deprivation indicators, and I know recently we published something on deprivation indicators. That kind of information wouldn't be possible without surveys, without going door to door asking people how are they getting on, I suppose. Just also things that aren't available in the administrative system, so like potentially like hours worked, union membership, and so on and so forth. I suppose also for official measures, and also I suppose what's very important is international comparability. You need international comparable definitions of unemployment, employment, so ILO definitions, particularly if you want to benchmark against your peers. So I think that's it. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any, and also if you want to contact me after, I'm more than happy to answer. So thanks very much, folks.
Okay, Sean, thanks very much. I mean, if I could be indulged to start off the question. I mean, in terms of, I work up here primarily in Northern Ireland, and we had a similar kind of program where HMRC provided real-time data to the Office for National Statistics, and it is kind of filled a certain gap here in terms of more timely pay data for Northern Ireland. And I suppose the thing that is, I mean, you covered it slightly there in the conclusion there, in terms of there is still the need for survey data to fill out the bits that admin data can't. I'm just curious if you could talk a bit more about linking admin and non-admin data. And obviously, I imagine the survey-based statistics are facing a bit of a challenge at the moment in terms of having to move more to telephone from face to face. I mean, is there more of a future in admin data than non-admin data? I mean, you say the survey stuff is needed to fill the gaps, but I mean, is it going to be much more efficient in the end to try and just add a greater reach to admin data rather than relying on survey data?
Well, I suppose, at the end of the day, it does depend what kind of question you want to answer. What are you looking to measure? Like things like, pay, or, I suppose changes in, whatever tax, admin data has a purpose, and, it's excellent for things like pay, as I said, tax, maybe pension contributions, but, as again, there's certain things you'll never know, like, as I said, indicators of deprivation. So are you able to afford, what is it, the hot meal, things like that, so I suppose at the end of the day, it's what you're trying to measure, what question you're trying to answer, and then you look at what data is available, and I suppose you pick the data that's most suitable, whether that's administrative data or whether it's survey data. It really does depend.
Just when you were saying there about that you can combine this data with educational attainment, that is available, isn't it?
So I suppose one of my colleagues looked at I was just recently, well, not recently, sorry, it was last year. So basically graduate outcomes. So those who graduated in cohort, whatever, 2011, 2012, how did they progress in terms of earnings? What sector do they go into? So that's actually available on the CSO's website, and I think it's a yearly publication. So if anyone's interested in something like that, I'd advise you to go look. So we have done, there's been a lot of, I suppose, admin-based publications in recent times, and I suppose that's one of them that I suppose looked at education outcomes in terms of earnings, and I suppose what sectors did particular graduates go into. So did graduates of, science and technology, did they go into the science technology sector, or did they go into some other sector? So yeah, that's work that's been undertaken already in the office.
Yeah, and in terms of, obviously, you outlined at the start there that obviously it's a significant uptick in terms of data that you guys are receiving. I mean, in terms of, I'm saying again from my experience of the HMRC, that the monthly data that they were putting out has always got a proviso in terms of how much information they've got back in for that particular period. Just in terms of the actual data collection, I mean, has that been an issue in terms of or is the system pretty much running at optimal level?
No, I suppose we've published a few things from the PMod. So I think we kind of take a 2 or 3 month lag just to make sure everything is settled down. But a 2 or 3 month lag in, I suppose previously 2020 data in terms of earnings we wouldn't have been able to look at until a year in advance. Now it's only a few months, so it's a big benefit in terms of getting more timely information out there, with I suppose a short lag in terms of a time delay really. So yeah, it's fairly settled from what we've seen anyway.
And in terms of just a final question here, in terms of the admin data, in terms of access for researchers, obviously, you know, each survey data source has their own particular sensitivities. But in terms of this admin data, in terms of how wide can the access for it ever get?
And so I suppose in the past, so going back to our old, I'll just call it the old P35. So we have provided RMFs to researchers and that. So in the past, what we provided was 100,000, or sorry, a 10% sample, I should say. So I presume, well, I would think it would be something similar with this, but I suppose we probably need to try to figure out with our colleagues in maybe revenue and probably internally how we pick a sample, and particularly if you have 12 monthly data sets, and basically how would you get a representative sample for each month, if that makes sense. So I suppose it's more of a methodological question of how would you pick something that's representative of the population. And I suppose again it also depends on what, you know, the research question that the researcher has in mind. So, you know, someone might be only interested in a particular geographical profile or a particular industrial sector. So we'll have to cross that bridge when it comes to it. But I would assume it would be something similar to what we did with the old P35.
Yeah. A question there on self-employed, and whether we could ever get to the same position with that. But obviously, self-employed income data or earnings data coming with quite a lag. And could you envisage something for that?
Well, I suppose that's not really my position to comment. It would be more revenue. So we only get the data in. I suppose we've no bearing on how it's collected, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the moment there is a lag in terms of self-employed. I think they're required to file at the end of the year. So I think around this time, I think it's around this time this year that, you know, filers are putting in for their 2019 returns. So yeah, that's, I suppose I can't really comment on in terms of any plans to move to timely basis on that.
Okay, well, listen, look, thank you very much for that, and it's an excellent presentation and a brilliant way to start ourselves off today. So thank you very much for that, and we will break here for the next few minutes, and everyone can grab a morning coffee, and we are starting our next session at 10 o'clock. The link to that, I think, will just gone up in the chat session there, if you can see it there. We will also have it tweeted out in the next few minutes. But all that remains for you is to say thank you again to Sean for coming here and giving a brilliant presentation. And we'll see you all in a few minutes.